Hello, we just want to welcome you today to our Sensory Integration for Autistic Adults webinar, where I'm joined by my colleague, Martha Hume,
Hello.
Who is an occupational therapist, and myself and the Clinical Director of Sensory Learning and Play C.I.C, which is based in Nottingham. Today we're going to go through some neurotheories, sensory stimulation, the window of tolerance in a bit of detail, a DIY sensory task where we'd like you to pause the webinar to be able to go through the task, and also some strategies and planning alongside some signposting, and then we will have an opportunity for you to do an online Q&A via YouTube, where this webinar will be saved.
So for many of you, you may be aware of what sensory integration is. You may know it as sensory processing. There are a lot of terms out there at the minute. Whether you're just new to it or whether it's something you're very familiar with, we're going to, at the beginning, just go through a little bit about what sensory processing or sensory integration is and how it can affect you as an autistic individual. Sensory integration is the neurological process that organizes sensation from one's own body and from the environment and makes it possible to use the body effectively within the environment. So basically, sensory integration is how your body receives information from its environment, but also from within itself, to let your brain make decisions and respond in a way that feels right for you. So I'll play a short video. With sensory integration, a lot of people, I suppose, link it up quite heavily to autism, but it's very important to remember that sensory integration is something that affects absolutely everyone. We're all experiencing our sensory world very differently, but autistic individuals seem to experience it in a much different way, which I suppose we're now reclaiming as in its own kind of beauty. This might explain a bit more about that, though. Okay, so as you can see from that video, there are a lot of benefits of having different sensory integration styles. It can make you an incredible sommelier. It can make you one of the best perfumers in the world. It can make you experience things like music really intensely, or nature or color in a way that other people will never have the luxury of doing. But I suppose, as it does point out as well, it can be very overstimulating. It can really make it, I suppose, your day-to-day tasks quite difficult. And as adults, it can really impact on things that are quite important, like work, your employment, financial implications. So being aware of your sensory world is really important, but more crucially, to be aware of how you perceive that is going to be the crux really of today's talk and today's webinar, finding out how you experience your sensory world. And we'll talk then later on about putting strategies in place to help yourself with that.
So we've got a bit of a DIY task for you now, and it's really getting used to your environment, what is around you, what you're taking in, and how this is affecting you as well. So at this point, we'd like you to pause the video and just take a quick sensory walk around your home or your environment, maybe the garden, wherever, for a couple of minutes, and then make some notes on what you noticed, whether that's around touch, sight, sound, so what you heard, smell, taste, maybe around your body and its awareness in the space around you, and kind of what was going on for you internally as well, inside. You don't have to cover all of these. It's just anything that you notice that stands out for you. So you can pause the video now and come back to it when you have finished your sensory walk and made a few notes. Okay, so welcome back. You should have paused the video and completed your sensory walk. It'd be interesting to know what kind of stood out for you, really, what notes you did make. What I'd like to do now is go into a bit more detail about the 7 senses. So we have touch, and some autistic individuals can either be hypersensitive or hyposensitive. So hypersensitive is an overstimulation, and hyposensitive is an understimulation in any of these senses. With touch, this could be anything to do with feeling pain through touch. I've had in the past, I've worked with individuals who have struggled even with a shower. It can feel like pins and needles, they've described it, going in the shower. So that's the hypersensitiveness when it comes to feeling touch. These may stand out to you, any of the examples we use, or they may not relate to you at all. You may have your own examples as well. Some can find it difficult brushing their teeth, brushing their hair, washing. Textures of food can be uncomfortable, and only tolerate certain types of clothing. Maybe wearing buttons on shirts can be difficult, or ties, necklaces, bracelets, tights as well because of the material, and then be really sensitive as well to the temperature in the environment. Under stimulation, so hypersensitive sensitivity in this area, autistic individuals may find that they have a delayed sensation or a delayed sense when feeling touched or when being touched, and this can be due to needing more pressure. These autistic individuals may also have what is sometimes known as a high pain threshold. So may experience pain but not kind of feel the pain in the same way. This can kind of sometimes result in them pushing themselves too far. It can result in maybe not having the medication needed at the right time as well for their body, because they're not feeling the pain in the same way, and then that can result in kind of effects and implications after what has occurred. Typically noticed a lot with autistic females during labour and giving birth as well. This has come up as one of the things during the labour process, and it's important, I guess, just as a tip, to share with midwives or with family members who may be in this position, that it's worth saying that you are a silent labourer. That is the term, and that means you're still in pain, but you may not express it in the same way as well. Sight, so being overstimulated in this area, there could be the kind of sensitiveness to vision around you, so your vision's distorted. Light or objects can appear to jump around or be too bright, and it's easier and more pleasurable to focus on details rather than the whole object. It can be difficult getting to sleep because of sensitivity to light as well. I'm trying not to give you all of the ways that we can resolve this right now, but another one that's come to me as I say that is, blackout blinds, different things like that, to be able to shut the light out. Under stimulation, so kind of not being as stimulated in terms of sight, objects can appear quite dark, and can lose some of their features. It could be that some objects are kind of magnified, but the things on the periphery are blurred as well. So there's poor depth and perception around this. This may result in catching and throwing, seen as being quite clumsy in that area. Again, as I said, this may not relate to you. This may be completely different for you, and it's worth communicating what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and kind of what your needs are as well whenever sharing this with someone else. With sound, we've got the overstimulation around hypersensitivity. Noise can be magnified, sounds can become muddled and distorted. You may be able to hear conversations in the distance, but not have the ability, I guess, to cut out background noises. So everything seems quite noisy. When being understimulated in this area, if there's a hyposensitivity, you may only hear sounds in one ear or the other, or have partial hearing or none at all. With smell, hypersensitivity, so being overstimulated, smells can be intense, overpowering. This can cause toileting or menstrual problems. There can be a dislike of people with distinctive perfumes and shampoos. I remember in the early days in my role wearing a certain perfume, and a lady always saying, "Oh, you've got that perfume. What perfume have you got on today? Have you got that perfume on?" And it wasn't until I got a bit more experience and realised that this lady, she was in fact an autistic lady, and it wasn't that she was paying me a compliment as I thought at the time. It was that she was actually struggling with the smell of my perfume. It was too strong. So I've definitely taken note over the years, when working in this area, but also kind of just how my smells, I guess, can affect others as well. There could be that understimulation as well, so hypersensitivity to smell. Some people have no sense of smell and can fail to notice or extreme odours. This can include their own body odour. Another word for that is nose blind, where you're getting used to the smell around you, I guess. And some people may lick things to get a better sense of what they are. We're moving on to taste. So the overstimulation with taste, some foods can be too strong. The taste of them can be overpowering, and an autistic individual can have very sensitive taste buds. So, in fact, resulting in a restricted diet. Certain textures can cause discomfort, and they may only eat smooth food like mashed potato, ice cream, and things like that. If understimulated with taste, so being hypersensitive, there can be a lack for very spicy foods and seek out very unusual flavors, such as non-food items, detergents, chemicals, powder, and whatnot. So vestibular, this is all about the balance, and if an autistic individual is hypersensitive in this area, there can be difficulties with activities like sport, where they may need to control the movements, stopping quickly or during an activity can be quite difficult. There may be kind of a car sickness, motion sickness, also known as being travel sick, and difficulties with activities where their head is not upright, or if their feet are off the ground. So look out for that one. It is one that's kind of not as noticeable and known. It's one that goes under the radar a lot, and people just see most people as travel sick, or they've lost their balance a bit. It's quite one that doesn't stand out as much, I guess. But look out for it. See if that's you or someone you know. Maybe they're understimulated in this area, and need to rock, swing, or spin, or get some sort of sensory input. We've got proprioceptive, and I'm not sure if you've come across this term before, or if you maybe have used it yourself, or if you've done a bit of research. But this is kind of the body's awareness in space. So it's a kind of the location of the movements of the body, and the body parts alongside the space around us as well. And this is, for instance, walking into a room and noticing and being able to move around objects like the sofa, the chair, the coffee table, and knowing where the body is within that space, appropriately. But also alongside that, we have kind of the interoceptive awareness, which is an internal sense. And this is kind of the emotional state of the body. So this is where a person is consciously or unconsciously noticing what is happening with their body. For example, this could be your stomach rumbling because you are hungry, or knowing that you need to go to the toilet because there's some sort of sensation that signals that as well. So this is an area that kind of, it's quite new, I guess, in this world of neurodivergence, and also for professionals as well. But it's one where it's really important to take note of, because again, it's just as important as the other senses that we have, and if not more, just in terms of kind of our emotional state, our internal state, and how that then interacts with our behaviours, our thoughts, and our feelings in life.
So I suppose if you think about the process there, so we've explored the seven senses, but really what happens inside us is really kind of how our body understands all this information. So we'll have, the example here is that you've got receptors as I suppose, for example, in your nose. And those receptors will detect odor molecules. That older molecules will then convert that into a neurological response. So it'll go from your receptors in your nose all the way back to the brain. And in the brain then will receive that information alongside other information. So, for example, other information from the eyes, other information from the skin, from the muscles, from receptors that are all over the body. And it'll use that information then to create a response. So often when you think of sensory processing, we can think about the kind of the key set the senses, I suppose, as such. So the sight, you might think about your ears, you might think about your skin, but you often don't think about the brain and actually where all that's put in together. It's a really, really complicated process that happens inside our brains. It's linked with things like our memory, it's linked with our early development, it's linked with evolution, about how our own brains develop. And for autistic individuals, there's a lot of research now that's being explored around that kind of evolutionary theory around that. So if you think about sensory processing as kind of a skill as such, as something that our body uses in order to keep ourselves safe, as something our body uses to explore our environment, to achieve our goals, it kind of helps us break it down a bit more in a positive frame kind of reference, I suppose. So we're going to talk a bit about the terms that we kind of covered there a little bit, just to explain what they are. And just if anyone would like to go on further and look up further bits of information, it might help you kind of navigate that. And then within this, we're going to talk about the window of tolerance. So in this slide, we think about the brain. And within that brain, for each of us as individuals, we're going to have a different ability to tolerate, I suppose, different inputs. So, for example, for someone maybe who could be quite visually impaired, so that they may actually, their eyes might be actually damaged, their brain's ability, for example, to take in sight is going to be very different to someone who isn't visually impaired. But for all of us, I suppose what we want to look at is how we can, first of all, keep ourselves within a safe space in our brains, but then also look at, I suppose, exploring what happens then when we go a bit outside of that. But first, we'll cover the terms. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. So if we think about sensory processing terms or sensory integration terms, I like to think about like Goldilocks, like this is this chair is too big, this chair is too small, this chair is just right, this part is too hot, this part is too cold, this part is just right. A lot of older terminology would have focused on the idea of being, I suppose, hypersensitive or hyposensitive, I suppose, referring to how you responded to the sensory environment around you. I prefer terms like overstimulated or understimulated. I think it takes the onus a bit more off us and a bit more onto the environment around us. But really, when we're thinking about putting strategies in place, I want you to come back and think about the Goldilocks, think about getting that just right challenge. Often when people start to look at sensory processing, they want to sort of set the bar like, really high. They want to be able to do everything. They want to learn how to not have these things bother them. But really it's about getting a fit between the environment and yourself and not trying to, I suppose, change either of them too much. I suppose that makes sense. If you think about this in terms of the window of tolerance, so Dan Siegel came up with the idea of the window of tolerance. Well, the window of tolerance is it's broken into three rows, such as three areas. And when you're in that kind of middle area there where there's that yellow line going through, you're within your window of tolerance. So what that means is that you're not feeling overstimulated, but you're not feeling understimulated. You're feeling just right. You're feeling that you can pay attention to what you need to pay attention to. You're present, you're curious, you might feel a lot more relaxed. You might feel more able to regulate your emotions. You might feel able to socialize. You might feel able to engage in a task that you really like to do and not be too stressed out about the world around you, effectively, the immediate world around you. But if we look at that top sphere, so that what's called the hyperarousal, that's when you're sort of becoming a little bit overstimulated. So what that might look like is that you start to feel a bit edgy, you might start to feel a bit anxious, you might start to notice your thoughts are starting to race a little bit, you might start to notice that you're feeling like you're a bit frustrated, but you don't know why. It can lead to feelings of confusion, which then will have emotional knock-on effects. So often what people will see when they hit that red state of hyperarousal is aggression, anger, throwing things around the place, shouting, having kind of meltdowns and such and just not knowing why. So when people come and ask, what's wrong, it can almost make it worse because it's like, well, there's nothing actually feeling wrong. I just think this one thing in my environment is really, really just too much right now. It can also, if left kind of checked unchecked for too long, it can lead to states of complete burnout. So almost like if you imagine an electrical wire, then if it starts to spark, it starts to spark, and then eventually it just stops sparking altogether because it's completely gone. So what that can look like is just feeling completely unable to concentrate, completely shut down. You might want to focus in on one solid thing in your environment and not be able to take away from it. It can feel like you're really lost control, and it can be a very, very scary space. Often people will notice, I suppose, when they're kind of entering into that red state is what we call hypervigilance. So suddenly you might be a lot sharper, a lot more aware of your sensory environment around you. You might be picking up on bits that you wouldn't normally pick up on, and that can kind of throw you off kilter a bit and make it even harder again to pay attention. What we're trying to encourage, I suppose, to try and build up that self awareness. So to start by just building up, noticing how you experience you going into that hyper arousal state, because it will be different for different people. And often when you do that, to try then and track to say, okay, am I in the red or am I like just going over into the red? Where am I on that slide? The reason why that's really important is if you can catch yourself before you go fully into that overstimulated space, you can bring yourself back into that window of tolerance, back into that just right fit. And we'll talk about some strategies that can help with that a little later on. Hyperarousal is probably less known about and for the most part often missed is the truth. So what that looks like is when you aren't getting enough stimulation. So if you're not getting enough movement breaks, if you're not being able, if you have to sit for long periods and you're zoning out, if you're noticing that you might be have to sit, I suppose, in a bus or you have to sit in an office space or to sit to go through lectures, if you're not getting enough stimulation, you'll start to kind of nod off almost. People experience this almost like an uncontrollable ability to stay awake. And it can be really distressing because you want to be awake. It could be something that you're very interested in that's been talked about, but your body physically won't let you. It can also, I suppose, mask or manifest a bit as if you're a bit depressed or you're a bit low in mood or a bit flat in energy. When for a lot of people that isn't actually not that they're feeling sad, they just feel a bit like they can't really engage with the world around them. And that can bring up feelings of shame, that can bring up feelings of wanting to just withdraw from people, and it can really impact our sense of self. So I suppose when we're aware of these things, it helps us to kind of go, okay, I can change this. Okay, I can do something about that, opposed to just sort of riding this big wave where you're going into these overstimulated and understimulated states. What's really important is that because so much of this happens within our internal world, people on the outside don't always understand and may not get it. And that can really be even harder again. It can feel like you're being gaslit. So it's really important is to over time when you feel comfortable to start and share these things with people around you, especially if you're in uni or if you're working. It's really important that maybe you have someone, maybe a manager or someone that you trust to sort of maybe open up about that. And we'll talk a bit more later on as well about your rights around that because it is seen as it is a valid. It's classified as a disorder, but I don't feel it that way. But that's what's classified as. So you're entitled to get support and entitled to get help around it. And what's really crucial, I suppose, if we look at that bottom line there, is that over time that can really be exhausting. So often what we will see with a lot of autistic individuals is autistic burnout. So if you're constantly having to go through states of being over and under and over and under, eventually your brain will just be too tired. So I think it's really important to recognize that, and also for women to recognize with our hormones are very, very heavily linked with this. So different cycles, different parts of your menstruation cycle, you may notice changes in those hormones. Also, I suppose, the different areas of development. So for all genders, that's going to be relevant. And when you go through puberty, when you hit your young 20s, when you go become an older person in your 70s, 80s, 90s, these will change. So I think it's important to just to be aware of that too.
So now what I'd like you to do is another DIY task. So it's a do it yourself. And I'm really interested in a day in the life of you. So I'd like you to list your average daily activities from waking up in the morning until falling asleep. And then once you've done that, put an N next to any of those activities that you find nourishing. So this is activities where they help you to feel better or you have more energy after. Once you've done that, I'd like you to add a D next to any of those activities that you find quite depleting. And this is where you feel worse or more tired afterwards. Okay, so you can pause the video here and I will leave the slide up so you can refer back to it if necessary. But start by listing all of your daily activities from waking up until falling asleep, and then go all the way until step 3 and then click play again. Okay, so you should have completed your list of daily activities, your nourishing aspects, and your depleting aspects, and maybe wrote down some thoughts. If not, you're welcome to do that as and when we're speaking as well. Anything that comes to you really about your reflections are so valuable. It's really important, I guess, of everything that you've found nourishing to notice is, does this lift me? Does this nourish me? And is this important to me? And the same for depleting, kind of what is pulling you, what's depleting you, what's draining your energy, and what's making you feel, tense or fragmented. I hear a lot of individuals share it as kind of having like, just feeling on like they're on autopilot or having brain fog, that they're not quite with it, like they're quite, I guess their responses are more robotic because they're not in the time and space. Their brain is somewhere else, or they're feeling quite tired or fatigued, as my colleague said earlier. And I wonder if when you look at this, you can think, what can I do to include more nourishing tasks, nourishing activities throughout the day? And this doesn't have to be, huge things. Nourishing for you might be something practical, physical, maybe just sitting in the garden, doing the garden, planting something, watering your flowers. It could be going for a walk, listening to music, dancing to music for a couple of minutes, having a bit of a break. Or it could be maybe eating your lunch and just focusing on eating your lunch instead of absolutely everything else that needs doing as well. It's different for everyone. And I guess something that is really important is to know that self-care looks different for all individuals, and how you take part, how you engage in self-care, is it should be for you and not because someone else gave you kind of an example of what to do that works for them. It should be something that actually works for you. So yeah, it's really important to do that. Also, it's important to note that there will be things throughout the day that are depleting. Unfortunately, I wish I had, a magic wand and could take them out of your day, but also my day too. But unfortunately, we don't have that. And we do know that these tasks still need to be done. It's worth knowing that as this happens, it may be worth increasing the effort around the nourishing tasks, and I want to say giving less effort to the depleting task, but I don't know if I'm allowed to say that because it might be work and I don't know what the response would be if you did that. So it's worth, I guess, not overextending yourself to the point where you're feeling autistic burnout, in that sense, and coating, or surrounding yourself with those nourishing tasks in and around the depleting tasks that you do have to do. So looking at the approach that you give to those tasks, the perception that you give to those tasks, and I guess letting go of the judgment around them. So instead of looking at them as boring or wishing you didn't have to do them, just doing them anyway and seeing how that goes without having the extra pressure of calling it a negative thing, I guess. So we're now going to show you part of a video from TED Talks, and it's Virginia Spielman talking about why your sensory health matters, and it's played from 9 minutes and 57 seconds. And this kind of echoes what I said on, the previous slide when we were talking about kind of the DIY tasks, the nourishing and depleting tasks. It's knowing what works for you, having a think about that, and I guess working life out, advocating for yourself or having those around you that can advocate for you too, and just kind of share, your needs and what is working for you.
So a good starting point for anyone who's looking at trying to, I suppose, dissect where they fall maybe within different sensory areas is by doing a short sensory profile on yourself. There's a really good link to oxfordcbt.co.uk where you can download a PDF, copy of a short adult sensory profile. And in this, it'll break down just simple tasks or some kind of ideas of things that might cause you to become over or understimulated. How it breaks it down is into 5 areas, going on the frequency of which maybe this statement is true for you. But it's a good place to start. I think with anything like this, it can be very overwhelming. Our sensory world is huge, and the areas that it breaks into are also huge. And unfortunately, we can't just experience one sensory input at a time. They all come at once together. So it's a great place to start. It's a great place to start to maybe highlight areas that maybe you're noticing are struggling or more challenging than others. But really, my background is as an occupational therapist, but always come back to function. So how this, I suppose, whatever comes out of a sensory profile is only as good as how it actually impacts your day-to-day life. So some people may come up as being high in certain areas, but because their lifestyle is quite, I suppose, adapted to that, it doesn't actually cause them any stress. So if it's not causing you stress, we tend to say, don't go near it. That's fine. Live your life. But I suppose if things are causing you stress and you're trying to dissect what's actually happening there and having that curiosity, absolutely encourage you to start there and to kind of make that your starting point. We're going to go through some strategies and it's a planning now that this is kind of the beginning step for that. Um, So I suppose you can start with the sensory profile, but also that might feel a bit too much right now. You can start at the end of every day. Just write down what you did that day. So similar to that DIY task that we did, just quickly jot down in the evening time what you did that day. Start to take notice of mood changes, especially. So are there parts of the day that you feel particularly irritable? Are the parts of the day that you're feeling particularly kind of, I suppose, frustrated? Maybe you're low in mood, and start to kind of label those emotions with it. Next is to track your energy levels. So this is the best way I find of looking at those depleting tasks. Because sometimes what can happen is you might really love a task, you might be really interested in a task, but you're still exhausted afterwards. And that can be a bit confusing. So by tracking your energy levels, it helps you to join those two sections together. So it might be that I went out to the garden. I felt really happy, and then suddenly I felt exhausted. So I suppose that could be an example, maybe where you're being overstimulated by your environment, and maybe then you might look at setting a goal around that. So often the goals that we set, the main reason why I really encourage you to set goals is that when you start to look into this, it can become a bit overwhelming. Suddenly there can be a lot of areas that you're going, oh gosh, I never noticed that, or I never noticed that, or oh, I never thought about it that way. And it can kind of feel like, where do I begin with this? It can feel like a lot, which if you don't, I suppose, start small with little bitty goals, it can just become a bit of a overwhelming task that you just don't want to go near. That can lead to feeling a bit defeated or a bit hopeless. So what I say when you set goals is obviously set smart goals, make them specific, make them measurable. Measurable is the key thing. So, if you've experienced that loud noises for your entire life, or being in a very loud noisy environment has really really been very distressing for you, it's not going to happen overnight that you're going to suddenly be able to manage those environments. So I suppose what we often say is set kind of curiosity goals is always a good way to start. So don't look at the performance outcome, look at understanding your sensory needs better. So set a goal that's focused on, I'd like to understand how I experience this environment better. That might be your first goal. And then your second goal might be, I want to implement one strategy to explore if that makes it easier. Nothing here, unfortunately, is a certain yes or a certain no. It's really up to you as an individual to figure out what works for you best. And I suppose that's kind of the beginning stages of it. So what we want to do first of all is be curious. You want to understand yourself a bit better. And then once you've kind of done that, start to set small goals for yourself. After that, it can be a long process. So often I encourage people is to kind of just write down any goal you can think of around your sensory environment. Write a big list of them. Don't worry about kind of achieving them, just write them out. What you can do then is you can start to kind of tick them off as you go. It gives you a sense of motivation, but also what will happen is when you come to the end of that list, you'll probably start it again because environments will change, you will change. So be really, really patient with yourself. Give yourself plenty of time. Put time aside in your week to focus on this. So it's important, I suppose, to have that daily check-in. But what's really important is to block out time where you sit down with yourself and think, okay, what went well this week? What would I like to do differently next week? That's going to help you, I suppose, commit to yourself and to commit to positive change. And I suppose it also helps that bit of self-compassion to know that it's not a sprint, it is a marathon. You have the rest of your life to figure it all out. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to have it all sorted right now. Next step, I would say, I also say before I get onto that, look at your timetable. Is also a really good way of doing this. So I know Naomi spoke earlier about that nourishing and depleting. If you've got a day that is absolutely jam packed full of depleting tasks, see can you take some of them and put them in different days. If you've got one day a week that's full of nourishing tasks and the rest are full of depleting, look can you stagger your nourishing tasks through your depleting tasks to help you stay in that window of tolerance. Often what people will say is that, I did, kind of, I hyper focused. I had spent like all weekend working away on something and then I couldn't do anything for 2 or 3 days. And that's pretty typical what we do see. So I suppose what we want to look at there is you have to work with the brain that you have. So saying to someone, just step away, that's never going to probably happen. So what it is it's looking at ways that you yourself can manage that. So how do you set time aside that you can almost set a timer that's like, okay, in 1 hour's time, I'm going to stop this task. In half an hour's time, I'm going to stop this task. Allow yourself to sort of gently nudge yourself out of one of those hyper focused states. Check in with yourself, check in with your sensory system, give yourself a few minutes. And if you feel like, okay, I'm not feeling too depleted, then go back into it. I suppose it's just about taking that time to pull back, check in, and go again. And that will be probably the biggest change you can make in your weekly, I suppose, timetable is putting time in there to check in. I think sensory equipment or sensory tools are brilliant. And nowadays they are everywhere, but just do be careful because they're everywhere also means that they're in everyone's spam and adverts and everything else. So get something that actually works for you. Start small and start practical. I often find sometimes the simplest things are the ones that actually work the best. So, for example, if you're noticing that after work you're extra sensitive to light, maybe you're a bit more tired, you're a bit more depleted. Okay, so you're leaving work and you're noticing that I'm extra kind of sensitive now to light around me, and you're noticing the knock-on effects of that. Maybe you're becoming hyper vigilant. Maybe you're going into that sort of hyper arousal state. Put on sunglasses, even if it's the middle of winter. Put on sunglasses. If you're noticing that when you're tired, the kind of auditory environment around you is really frustrating, put in headphones. Doesn't need to be specialist headphones, just put in something to help block out that sensory input. Um, Things that are quite useful if you're specifically, I suppose, prone to auditory stuff are things like in-ear loops. So if you're going to a concert or if you're going to somewhere where you're not going to be able to get away to take a sensory break, things like that can be useful. A lot of current Bluetooth headphones have that built in now, though. So just be aware of that too, that you don't go out and kind of buy loads of stuff. Figure out what works for you. Try the stuff that's available to you immediately. And if that's not working, then maybe you want to step it up to something a bit more specialized. I'd always recommend if you're going towards anything that's highly specialized, please consult an occupational therapist or please consult a specialist in the area to help guide you on that as well. Um, I'm sure a lot of people, the big thing of our generation are fidget spinners, um, things that can fidget jewelry for adults. Um, these things are all very, very useful, but also within that again, think about things like your key rings. Think about things like wearing a necklace that you can kind of just fidget with itself. These kind of day-to-day things you may already be doing without noticing. So incorporating it into things that you already do is going to make your life a lot easier and make that adjustment to change a lot simpler. And be aware though of other things as well. So for example, if you're someone who, when you do your sensory profile, you realize that you're understimulated by taste or understimulated by sense of smell, they're two quite highly kind of unrecognized ones, I guess. So sense that people kind of forget about, but it can be quite effective. So some people, if they're even under aroused by senses, can find themselves getting frustrated for absolutely no reason when they're just sitting there and all the other systems are totally fine. So things like that are good to be aware of. So what I do usually recommend is if you are anyway understimulated, bring things with you to help you stay stimulated. So for example, bring a little bottle of perfume that you can spray, a strong scented one that you can spray on your wrist and you can smell to help you keep in that window of tolerance. And likewise, if you are someone who gets highly overstimulated by the sense of smell, find ways to take breaks in your day. Bring a hanky and have somewhere quiet that you can dab it in water and just give your nose a bit of a break, even just that kind of 5-10 minute break to allow your body to kind of regulate and then go again. Some people find things like chewing gum can be really effective for a whole heap of reasons. Not just, I suppose, if you're understimulated by taste, but even for that proprioceptive chewing sensation can be really relaxing for a lot of people. But also it can help you stay alert. So for any of our, I guess, other sensory seeking people out there, having to sit still for a long period of time can be really stressful. So things like that, like having a chewing gum break, things that having a sips of your drink, things like that, casual things that you may already have access to in the office or in the uni, can be a nice way to start. Also, it can kind of make you feel like more part of the gang, if that makes sense. Like I think we all do it. Every single person in the world will do things to regulate their sensory system every single day. But for some reason, I think autistic individuals get a rap. And it's actually like a lot of the stuff that we all do every day is what works as well for everyone. So just look at things that work for you and kind of take ownership of that as well. The last thing is to ask for help and know your rights. So the Equality Act covers reasonable adjustments. That's a law. It's legal. It's in the workplace. So if you like feel that your workplace setting is really causing you a lot of distress, it's very depleting, you're having to sleep all weekend, have a look at doing an environmental audit of your workplace. Have a look at how you work. Is there the opportunity for flexible working? Can you work hybrid? Can you spend some days in your own environment where you've control on that kind of sensory space? Or if you're in a big, large office or you're in a busy school or a hospital, find ways that you can take sensory breaks to help you stay alert, but also to help you not getting overstimulated within the workplace. So that's, I suppose, what's important within that is it's really good to ask for help, but do be aware there are rights there for you so if there's any pushback, that they do exist. Also ask for help. It's a minefield. Sensory integration is a huge area, and there's some really good sensory therapists out there who can help and nudge you in the right direction. Sensory coaching is becoming more and more aware. People are becoming more and more aware of sensory coaching. So be aware of that yourself, and don't feel like you have to do it all on your own either.
And that leads us nicely on to kind of areas where you can get support. I would also like to kind of share again that the chat will be open on YouTube for a while for you to share, any spaces where you believe, are also appropriate and can support autistic adults in their journey to understanding themselves and advocating on behalf of themselves as well and getting more support. So any signposting that you have, please also share that in the chat on YouTube once this is available. So we've got the reasonable adjustments at work for autistic people that I'd like to kind of draw your attention to. And it's more about kind of keeping autistic adults in work, but also ensuring that the environment is fair, it's accessible, and a place that autistic adults want to and feel happy to work in. That is not because of any other reason, but they deserve that, just like any other person does as well. And the majority of the time, from what research and stats have shown, is there is a high majority of autistic adults that may, be successful in gaining employment, but the difficulty is staying in employment, and usually it isn't because of the fault of that individual. It's just that the environment is not conducive to meeting their needs. So this will help with ensuring that there's reasonable adjustments in the workplace, that the manager understands this, and also that it's common practice around the workplace. It's in policies, it's in procedures, and it's in the law, as we said earlier with the Equality Act. It's also important to know that you can go to citizen advice to know what rights you do have as well and get support. There are advocacy services. I'd really encourage you to tap into this. It's an area that many individuals don't know much about in terms of who can help and what they can do. But the point is, especially with this webinar, anyone that you do, it's not that you do everything for yourself and you don't get any help. There's a saying, no one is an island, no one has to do it all on their own. We need each other. So it's a great example of that with the Disability Rights UK Advocacy Service, and it's around getting your voice heard. So please look out for that as well. It's online. As I was saying earlier about reasonable adjustments, the name of that is access to work. So if you haven't heard of that, you can go on .gov and type in access to work, and you'll find information there. And you also get to apply for a grant which will help with support within the workplace, and that could be for equipment, laptops, monitors, a chair, different things, software maybe, as well. So as we're aware, autism is typically co-occurring with another need, and this could be, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD. It could be a mental health difficulty. So it's really important that you do get the help, support, and advice also that you might need. But feel free, to share more in the chat. We do have locally to ourselves, not help yourself. I say locally to ourselves, and we're both presenting from different parts of the world. Locally to me, Nuts Help Yourself, Martha, our colleague, is in Ireland. But yeah, so locally on this end is Nuts Help Yourself, and Martha may be able to share some locally to her as well. That end, it's always good to collab, right? And then we just want to share, a last thing with you, and we'll leave you for today. Is we are going to be expanding our service to include sensory coaching, and that will be to support yourselves with kind of a one-to-one coach, and that's to have that kind of deeper sense of self-awareness and fulfillment. This will be virtual, and it will be with a trained OT, or someone who is trained in sensory integration as well. So rest assured that you'll be getting as best as we can offer, and the support that you need, or may need, or definitely what you deserve as well, to help you achieve your goals. So that's it from me. Is there anything else from you, Martha?
No, thank you very much for staying with us, and best of luck in your sensory journey.
Thank you, Martha. If you do have any questions or any comments or anything that like support with or advice on, feel free to contact us on info@lookinside.org.uk. Our details and telephone number are also there as well, and you can find out more about our service on www.lookinside.org.uk. Thank you.
Thanks.